This is an interactive presentation designed to stimulate discussion and illustrate the importance of critical thinking. It can be used by an instructor in a classroom or by an individual if you're instructing yourself. Simply think about and respond to the questions before you proceed to the next slide. Here's how to proceed. When you see text colored blue, this is a question to ask the students or answer yourself. When you see the number in brown followed by a pause icon, pause the video, list the answers that you think are correct, and discuss them before you're proceeding. Then reveal the point to make, followed by an explanation, and then resume the video. Today we're working on an 09 Lincoln LS with a 3.0 engine. It's got about 85,000 miles on it. The driver said it started running bad, so she took it to a shop. They checked a few things, replaced a couple coils, so they couldn't find out what else was wrong with it, and then she brought it to us. What we found on our initial observation is that it does start and run, it just won't accelerate, and it runs like it's missing, not running on all cylinders. Let me show you. So it's running, and on the video you might not be able to hear, but it is missing. It's got that thump, 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 thump sound to it. You can feel the car shaking. And now let's try and accelerate it. So when I step on the gas, it just barely accelerates. I put off the gas pedal. I'm going to go to wide open throttle. And you can see there's hardly any response to it. So what's the first thing that you would do, and why? Our check engine light is on, so we do have some codes, but the first thing I always like to check is vacuum. Yes, the check engine light is on, and that means that there are codes stored in the memory. Codes mean the computer has found something that isn't right and it needs attention. Now remember, the computer is an electrical device. However, all engines are first air pumps. If you take away the computer and all the electronics, the engine is a mechanical air pump. Vacuum gauges are often forgotten in this age of OBD2 scanners and our other specialized tools, but a vacuum gauge can very quickly tell you whether or not your engine has a mechanical problem and isn't pumping air correctly. And knowing that the engine is or is not mechanically sound can be of great value once you do retrieve the codes, and then you begin the electrical diagnosis process. Now the first thing I always like to check is engine vacuum on a running engine, because that gives me an early indication as to whether or not I'm looking at a mechanical issue or some other kind of problem. So we've got an easy access to vacuum right here. We're just going to pop that off. Catch my vacuum gauge. And as you can see on my vacuum gauge, I've got a steady needle. That tells me that I don't have any kind of a valve issue. Now my vacuum is a little bit low. Technically at idle it should be around 16, 17, maybe 18 pounds, and I'm a little bit low. We're going to address that later, but right now I know that I don't have a mechanical issue. So the question was, what's the first thing you would do? The answer is perform an engine vacuum test. Now, what's the next thing you should do, and why? Now it's time to scan for codes. Now we do have a check engine light on, so that means the computer has found something it doesn't like. So we're going to scan for codes. Now when we scan for codes, we see that we have 14 total codes. 4 of them are engine codes, 4 are transmission, 1 is an anti-theft, 1 is for automatic temperature control, 2 are for a rear electronic module, and 1 is for the instrument panel. Now with all these codes spanning several monitors and the history that someone else has worked on this before and it's been driven since, well, we can't be sure which codes are real and which may have been set because of prior testing. So in this case, I like to clear the codes, start it, let it run, retrieve the codes again and see which ones come back as active. Now you have to keep in mind that when you clear codes, you also clear the freeze frame data. But in this case, that's okay. I actually want to know if any of the codes come back, and if they come back instantly or if the engine has to run for a while before they set. If codes come back instantly and freeze frame data confirms that, then I know the codes are real. And now you can see here that we've got 4 codes: P0353, 355, 356, and P1000. Now the 1000 just basically means the computer's seen a problem, therefore it has not completed all of its monitors. What we want to focus on here is the 3 codes, the 353, 55, and 56. Those all are indicating a ignition coil primary secondary circuit fault. So this is not a misfire code, or it'd be like P0303, 305, 306. Instead, it's a coil circuit fault. That's why the 353, 355, and 356. What's the difference between the code P0355 and P0305? Code P0305 is a common misfire code. This misfire monitor diagnostic is based on the variation in crankshaft velocity. The PCM determines this information using the crankshaft position sensor and the camshaft position sensor. A misfiring cylinder slows down momentarily, so by monitoring the cam and the crank sensor signals, the PCM can calculate when a misfire occurs. Now our code P0355 is a little bit different. Now this diagnostic code sets when the powertrain control module, the PCM, does not receive a valid ignition diagnostic monitor pulse signal from the ignition module, which is integrated tied internally in the PCM. It has nothing to do with velocity. Now this diagnostic code, the P0355, only sets for a coil primary circuit failure. When this code is set, the PCM enters failure mode, effects management, and it shuts down the injector for the associated cylinders in order to protect the catalytic converter. This is a normal operation. So P0305 is set because of a change in velocity. Code P0355 is set because of a circuit failure. What do we do with this information? That it shuts down the injector for an associated cylinder? So you might be asking yourself, why aren't we testing for fuel pressure and/or testing the injectors? Well, if it was a fuel pressure related problem, fuel pressure, the lack of it or the excess of it would affect all of the cylinders on an equal basis. We do not have that situation. Why not test the injectors? Well, we can see from the O2 sensors that at idle it's very, very lean. And remember the description of the code? When the computer sets that code, it also turns off the injectors so that it will protect the cab. Well, if it turns the injectors off, obviously we're going to be lean. So we don't need to follow injectors here or fuel pressure. Since 3 cylinders have these codes, those 3 injectors will be shut down. And that tells me that we don't need to consider and test the injectors, at least at this point. Instead, let's focus on why these codes were set and look at the injectors after we resolve the coil circuit problem.